Speaking of police being part of the problem. Speaking of police being part of the problem. We have the moment that Brass Eye, which I'm not familiar with Brass Eye myself, but the person who posted this has titled it, "The moment that Brass Eye became real life." As far as I know, Brass Eye is like a satirical show that was on British TV a good while ago. And we now have, ladies and gentlemen, as I said before, undercover operations with our daring Surrey police. And remember when I said that females, in particular, women in particular, are some of the most ardent followers of the political orthodoxy, the religion of leftism? This is a great example of that, where we've got all this stuff going on that I've just mentioned before, and all the stuff that we've talked about on episodes past, time and time again, all the child rape and all of the rape, rape reported every hour and all of this stuff, and people lying about everything at every turn. All of this stuff going on, right? That what the police actually need to do, not tackle shoplifters, not tackle the epidemic of all of the crimes going on at the moment. No, the police need to divert their taxpayer funds, the funds that they're getting from the taxpayer, and their time and effort, not towards the serious crimes, no, to tackling non-crimes. So the police are now spending all of this. This was a month-long sting. This was a month-long sting that resulted in 18 arrests, mind you, 18 arrests for non-crimes. For non-crimes. So what this is, you had two female runners that were undercover police officers that were jogging in these areas, presumably very safe areas, very, very safe areas. You don't see them running past like migrant hotels and stuff like that, right? You see them running through what seem to be standard middle class neighborhoods, right? And they're being followed, they're being covered by their police units, who the moment anybody does anything, maybe even just says anything to them, which can be construed as a catcall or a compliment, if a car happens to beep its horn going past, even though it might not be towards them whatsoever, it will be classed as, I suppose, what would you class it as? Sexually aggravated harassment or whatever. And like SEAL Team 6, right, the police would swoop in, pull the car over or pull the people over, and give them a good little finger wagging in the face and actually arrest them in many instances. And people are making the easy observation to see that this is just directly designed to entrap white men in particular to skew the stats with regards to sexual crimes in more of the establishment's favour. They're trying to cook the books however they can, and they're doing so by outright admitting that they're arresting people for non-crimes, that this stuff is not a crime, and the police say as much. Now remember that they're saying they're arresting people for non-crimes, but they couldn't arrest the guy that trespassed on somebody's property earlier on in this episode because he hadn't committed any crimes. So when it's convenient for the establishment, they can arrest people for catcalling, right? For catcalling, complimenting women, right? Which you can make the argument that it's kind of sleazy and it shouldn't be done, right? Then can you make the argument that there's harm done or anything like that? Now, if you're being followed by somebody, if somebody's following you or is driving their car next to you and won't leave you alone, okay, that's the thing. You have a harassment claim there. You have a harassment. But that's what things are going to do. If somebody just, drives past and looks past you at the window, looks out their window at you as they drive past, what's the harm that's really done? What's the harm that's really done? But no, people need an excuse to be offended about anything, an excuse to be a victim about anything, even though nothing's really happened. But also, the main thing they wanted was to cook the books with regards to the sex crime stats, because it's not looking good. It's not looking good with all the reports coming out that you cannot even go a week. You cannot even go a week without hearing, for example, about a channel migrant rape incident. And stuff like that. But here's the footage from LBC, ladies and gentlemen, of these very daring, very courageous, undercover, sexy jogger police officers.
These women aren't friends out for a run. They're actually undercover police officers taking to the streets in Surrey as part of a new operation trying to stop people catcalling and harassing female runners.
We get honked at, the staring, the hanging out of the window just to look at us, and it's so prevalent.
And police teams are ready to intervene the moment the officers are beeped at, followed or shouted at, pulling people over.
Those kind of behaviours may not be criminal offences in themselves, but they still need to be addressed. And of course, the people that are likely to commit those kind of behaviours, they may then go on to commit more serious offences or more serious behaviours.
So they're outright saying, as I said before, and apologies if I look a little bit thin at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, I was just drinking my coffee and I accidentally spilt it all over my face because there was more left in the mug than I thought. So, fair to say that was quite embarrassing. But anyway, things that go on behind the video when you guys can't see. So as I said, mentioned here, the guy literally says when they're pulling over, following them or shouted at, it makes you think, what could they be shouting at them for as well? They're not making any reasons to why they're being honked at, why they're being shouted at or anything like that. Or as a case, for example, one of them forgot to check the road and a car wanted to pull into the junction and then they honked because they were quite angry, right? So it could be all of these things, right? But it says here, those kinds of behaviours may not be criminal offences in themselves, but they need to be addressed. So here's the thing. This is attitude policing now. This is not policing criminals. This is attitude policing. But yet, as you mentioned before, ladies and gentlemen, as we mentioned a while ago, go back to the first video that we watched, said we cannot arrest him because he didn't steal anything or there was no suspicion of a further crime that was to be committed. But in this instance, it's fine to arrest 18 men on the same grounds. And I think trespassing onto someone's property and standing in there is more serious than honking at a jogger as she runs down the road. I think there's a disparity there. And I think we can agree on that. But this is what your police is using their resources to do, their taxpayer resources to do. It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And you have, you have no end of children being abducted and attacked, usually by foreigners, but not always by foreigners, as we'll get into it in a little bit when we talk about the attitudes of some people towards this incident, and how we have to view it when it's some of our own. I've been made aware of a really horrendous case of something which I didn't know had happened. I didn't know had happened before. Pardon me. I'm having trouble clearing my throat at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, so that's why I got to clear my throat every now and again. A really horrendous incident that happened. But like I said, when it is convenient for the establishment because they want to try and push a narrative, they want to try and push this narrative that there's now going to be an epidemic of sex crimes among predominantly white men. But it makes you think, if an experiment that happened in New York a little while ago, New York City, is anything to go by, I'm not sure if you've seen it. Matt Walsh talked about it in his recent show. There was an experiment, quote unquote, that was run in New York City to expose this reality of I think they called it the reality of living as a woman in New York City. And it was documenting the catcalling epidemic in New York City, right? And that you had a woman, attractive woman, walking down the street, and you had all manner of different men saying things, to her. Some of them were being very creepy, admittedly following her and stuff like that, trying to get her to talk to them. And she's just walking down the street, minding her own business. Some of them were trying to get her number, all of these things. And not doubting any of that, right? Not saying necessarily anything about that. But they later come out and apologized because the narrative didn't go in their favor and they were accused of racism or unconscious bias or whatever, because the vast majority of the people catcalling and harassing this woman were either black or Hispanic. So it makes you think, A, what's the makeup of the people that they've arrested in this? Did they actually find out what they were trying to find out? And would they have a shock if they didn't? And I suppose we'll see that if they actually come up with the demographics of who was arrested. I don't believe they have yet. If that social experiment is anything to go by, where you had I believe it was just like one instance of a white man who was construed as saying something to the lady, but it wasn't actually clear whether he was. Because a lot of the times it would just be like a man's walking past this lady and he'd say something like nice or yeah or something like that, right? And it was construed as a catcall, when obviously those things could be something which is just on the phone, right? This thing, sometimes you're going to get sleazy men that are going to do this. It's a reality of life. The only thing is, sometimes it's better just to let it go like water off a duck's back. Like water off a duck's back. And that's the way you think that probably would have been dealt with, a little while ago. And that in some instances, you imagine that there'd be, some women that would play into it as well, not justifying the action by any means. It is kind of sleazy, right? It is kind of sleazy. Especially if you're like hollering at a woman outside of your car window or something like that, or whatever it might be. But it makes you wonder: did this police department, did Surrey actually get the conclusion that they wanted? But again, this is where your taxpayer funds are going. Meanwhile, you have no end of really horrific crimes going on. That if you ask them to deal with them, you get called everything under the sun. You get called racist and all manner of things. Which you might want to take into account, ladies and gentlemen, that how much the police are actively putting you in danger with the adoption of this, leftist orthodoxy, this radical leftist orthodoxy, and the politicization that they have undergone, particularly with regards to the, the Labour political orthodoxy as well. Whereby, we have to have compassion for the criminal now. We have to have compassion for the criminal now, which is evident in this article from The Telegraph. I mentioned before that the Labour government are going to be releasing offenders early if they have, was their sentences longer than 10 to 14 years, I think it was. There's an alarming thing, however, that's happened with this, which it's alarming but not surprising in the slightest. For every 4 prisoners released early after Labour's overcrowding, the scheme they put in place to deal with overcrowding, namely they would release, prisoners early on certain grounds, right? It should surprise you because they need to fill the jails with thought criminals like Lucy Connolly and stuff like that, but not Ricky Jones, obviously. They released a bunch of them, and it should surprise you that should not surprise you. 75%. 3 for every 4 that were released were recalled after the implementation of this scheme, meaning that they had reoffended and they were brought back in. They were recalled to jail. 3 prisoners have been recalled to jail for every 4 freed this year following Labour's launch of its early release scheme. Some 13,296 offenders were freed from prison in the first 3 months of this year, whilst 10,101 were recalled for either committing further crimes or breaching their licence conditions, according to Ministry of Justice data. The number of prisoners recalled represented a 36% increase on the previous year, with Ministry of Justice statisticians citing the introduction of the government's early release scheme last September as a factor. Under the current Labour system, prisoners serving sentences for less serious crimes can be freed after serving 40%, not even half of the jail term, instead of the previous 50%. As a result, they spend longer in the community, giving them more time to offend or breach their licence. It also means that the prisoner understands that there is less of a deterrent, there is less of a reason to care about it, right? There's less of a reason to not reoffend in the future because the punishment is not there to basically intimidate them. That's basically what the punishments for breaking the laws serve as, right? They serve as intimidation to people not to do these things. That's what they're there for. That's exactly what they're there for. So it makes you wonder, why are we reducing the punishment at every single turn, seemingly even for the most heinous crimes in some instances? But nearly a quarter, 23% of those recalled, face a charge of further offending. 3/4 failed to comply with their licence. These included 34% who failed to keep in touch with probation and 22% who broke rules requiring them to reside at an approved address. In many instances, there was more than one reason for a recall. So again, just a complete lack of respect for the system. So you cannot give these kinds of people, they cannot be trusted with this. They cannot be trusted, so they cannot be dealt with in this hyper-lenient way and expect them to have a positive result. Sometimes you just need to be quite harsh on people, and you need to keep them in jail, even if it, even if it means that, at least for now, you can go use more taxpayer money or whatever, or they made a little bit more uncomfortable. Doesn't really matter. They shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place. But it should be no surprise to anybody that then you have, for whatever reason, 3 out of 4 people who were let out early being recalled to jail for one reason or another. But again, why are they letting these people out into our communities in the first place? This is, what do they call it? Restorative justice, I believe is the term that they use. But always remember, ladies and gentlemen, that compassion, especially in this instance, compassion to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. Because the people in the communities that these people are being let back out to reoffend and get recalled and do all of these things, they don't deserve this. They don't deserve this. It's being inflicted on them nonetheless.